Hi everyone, welcome to the Mind Oracle channel. Today we will be looking at retrieval failure, including the key terms and definitions, as well as the research behind it, and of course the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. So, first of all, retrieval failure explains forgetting as there not being enough cues to aid recall. So, when encoding information, cues are stored as well to help us remember information. So, for example, if you're revising for an exam, you might remember that the date of a certain historical event, for example, is a date that's marked on your calendar or something like that. It would be a cue around you that helps to aid the recall of information. And if these cues are not accessible, we therefore cannot access the information and therefore cannot recall that memory. Some key terms that are really important for this theory, one of them is encoding specificity principle, which is essentially the idea that the greater the similarity between the encoding event and retrieval event, the greater the likelihood of recalling the original memory. The three different types of cues that you also need to know are meaningful links. So, an example of this would be mnemonics, and the other two would be context, which are external environmental cues, and the state, which is an internal cue. Now, let's take a look at the research going behind this theory. So, first of all, we'll be looking at research into state dependent cues. This was done by Carter and Cassidy, and essentially, there was a group of participants who had to learn a list and recall the list while being on antihistamine drugs, and another group that had to learn the list on antihistamine drugs and then recall the list when not on drugs. There were another two groups that did not learn the list on drugs but recalled on the drugs, and the fourth and final group being they didn't learn the list or recall the list while being on drugs. So there's four groups, and essentially two of the groups they swapped. So one of them learnt while on drugs, one of them recalled while on drugs, and then the other two either they both learnt and recalled the list while on the drugs, or they didn't have any drugs at all. That would be the control group. The dependent variable is the recall of words and passages of prose. So they were given a list of words or a passage to learn and then recall later. The results show that when the states were matched, so for example, learning and recalling the list while on antihistamine drugs, so in the same state, the recall was better. So in conclusion, this means that cues, such as the physical state of you, whether or not you are on antihistamine drugs or not, can aid recall. The second study that is useful to know about with this theory is research into context-dependent cues. So the four independent variables here are the same concept as the study before. So it's whether or not the participant learned the list on land and recalled on land, or whether they learned the list on land but recalled underwater, whether they learned the list underwater and recalled underwater, or whether they learned the list underwater but recalled on land. And the study was done by Gon and Bally. We have covered this in a previous video, and essentially it's again same sort of concept, but this time it's about the environmental context rather than the physical state of the participant. The dependent variable, similar to before, is recall of words, and the results showed again that when the states were matched, so for example learning and recalling the list when on land, the recall or the accuracy of recall was better. This, in conclusion, means that cues such as the environmental context, our surroundings, can also aid recall. Now we will be moving on to the evaluation, so we'll be looking at strengths and weaknesses of retrieval failure as an explanation for forgetting. So the first most obvious one would be research support. We have the Carter and Cassidy study about the antihistamine drugs, and also the Gordon Badley study about the underwater diver study. So a strength to say about this would be that they were both controlled lab conditions, and therefore it's less likely that extraneous variables will affect the dependent variable, which you would have to be specific about what each variable is when you're writing out the full pure paragraph. So an example of an external or an extraneous variable rather would be a certain factor of the surroundings that might not have been controlled if they hadn't done it in a lab setting, for example, sound or any distractions that could affect the accuracy of recall. And the dependent variable is, of course, the recall of or the accuracy of recall of passage or prose or words, depending on which study you're referencing. And the link would be that this increases the internal validity of the study, which in turn increases the credibility of retrieval failure as an explanation for forgetting. Another strength of the retrieval failure theory is real life application. So, the results and the conclusion that we have can be used in cognitive interviews. So, for example, the idea that you learn and recall in the same state could be used to support the idea that when you're asking eyewitnesses about a certain crime, you should help to aid their recall by maybe taking back to the scene of the crime or a similar location. This improves the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, which means that we are able to accurately convict the perpetrator and help the victim, which is in turn beneficial for society as a whole. Now, a really easy weakness for this would be to just say that there is an opposing theory. So, in an earlier video, we covered the interference theory. So, if you haven't watched that yet, please do go check that out. It will be there in more detail. But essentially, the crux of it is that different types of information that we store may disrupt or overwrite other types of information that we hold in our memory store. So, just saying that there's an opposing theory called the interference theory, explain what the theory says and what it is, and then essentially saying that the retrieval failure on its own would be incomplete since it does not reference the idea that information can overwrite each other depending on when you learn it, whether it's before or after, so retroactive or proactive. So that was the main crux, the main theory, and the evaluations for the retrieval failure. And while these videos are definitely a great way to improve your understanding of the topic, I'm also in the process of creating revision notes and summaries on a website called The Orbit of the Mind. Here you can find sample essays that store top marks, and you can also find bonus evaluations to help you get the highest grades possible. So please do stay subscribed and keep in touch for further updates. I will make sure to let you know when the website is available for use and when the products are available to be bought. But yeah, I'm working on those right now and I really hope that you guys will find them useful. Also, if you are interested in exploring psychology outside of the curriculum and making sure that you explore certain topics to a deeper understanding and a deeper level beyond what the specification requires of you, or even if you're just an avid reader of different psychological articles and books and movies and films, please do check out our sister channel called The Mystic Mind. We explore a range of topics covering love and attachment styles to how to achieve discipline and motivation to even supernatural myths and psychological theories that may not be on the curriculum to that much level of detail. So if you'd be interested in that sort of thing, please go check that out. It's on our homepage for this channel. Okay, so our last exercise is an exam style question. So make sure to read the question and plan out your answer, plan it out as a 16 marker, and then try responding to it. But the question is describe and evaluate interference as an explanation for forgetting. So this is a little bit of revision. It wasn't covered in this video, but we have done interference before. This is the lesson previous to this one. So do give this a go. Make sure to pause the video and then come back to it when you're done. Okay, so in terms of the mark scheme, there are loads of points that you could get. So first of all, your definitions are really important. So, saying that interference is when two lots of information become confused, disrupted, or overwritten. Any of those terms are fine. Defining proactive and retroactive interference. Remember, you cannot use the word itself to define it. And also saying that interference is more likely to occur when there are two pieces of information which are similar to each other is really important. And if it's a 16 marker, so this side of the mark scheme would be good for an 8 marker. If it's a 16 marker, I would highly encourage you to cover some of the studies that we learnt. So Gordon and Badley, Carter and Cassidy, McGoach and MacDonald, naming these and explaining the independent dependent variable as well as the results and conclusion is really, really important. And some of the evaluation points that you could remember or you could have said are research evidence to support or contradict, so the different studies that we talked about, and also the fact that loss of information may only be temporary and therefore interference is not a true explanation for forgetting. And you can also criticize the studies themselves. So, yes, they were taken in a lab setting, so they have high internal validity, but they're also not necessarily of reflective of real life because real life is not a lab study. So it might lack external validity. So there's loads of different points that you can mention. You don't have to write all of them. These are just examples, and it's more of a test to see how much you could remember from the previous lesson or the previous video. Alright, and that's everything for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do remember to stay updated for more news about the website, and do go check out our sister channel, Mystic Mind. If you like this video and you found it useful, please do like and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments below what kind of videos you want to see again in the future, and whether you have any feedback, we'd be more than happy to take it on board. But yeah, other than that, thank you for watching, and until the next video, happy revision.